Good afternoon to everyone who is joining us from London, e bom dia a todos que nos assistem do Brasil. I'm Fred Arruda, Ambassador of Brazil to the United Kingdom. A little bit over a year ago, we had the pleasure of welcoming you to the Embassy of Brazil in London for the launch of this series of annual events we call AgriSustainability Talks. Back then, no one could have predicted that we would be meeting virtually today. A lot has changed in 2020 due to the pandemic, but the debate around the sustainability of agriculture remains ever so important. I am very proud that we have managed to keep momentum during such a challenging year. Following up last year's event, the embassy launched a bulletin called AgriSustainability Matters, which is also being published in Spanish, German, Chinese, and of course, Portuguese. And now we have the pleasure of welcoming you for the second edition of AgriSustainability Talks. Jonathan Whitley with the Financial Times will be our moderator. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for kindly agreeing to moderate our two panels. We are very happy with this year's lineup of speakers, and I would also like to thank each one of the panelists for taking time off their busy schedules to join us. And a big thanks to both my Deputy Head of Missions, Roberto Dorin and João Paes Leme, who will be wrapping up discussions today and tomorrow. Today we'll have the opportunity of hearing from experts both from Brazil and the UK. They will share the perspectives of regulators, producers, and consumers about carbon footprints of the livestock sector. Discussions will touch upon topics related to traceability, sustainable intensification of cattle herding, payments for environmental services, and Embrapa's carbon neutral beef brand. Before we move on to the panel, it is with great pleasure that I invite you to watch a brief message from the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply of Brazil, Minister Tereza Cristina. I hope you enjoy today's debate, and I invite you to join us tomorrow at the same time for a panel about green finance for agribusiness and bioenergy, which is also a topic of utmost importance nowadays. So, thank you very much.
Senhoras e senhores, participantes da segunda edição do AgriSustainability Talks. Quero parabenizar a Embaixada do Brasil em Londres pela organização de tão relevante evento para discutir a sustentabilidade da agropecuária brasileira. Sei do sucesso do encontro realizado no ano passado, que contou com palestrantes do mais alto nível. Neste ano, ainda que a pandemia nos impeça de estarmos reunidos numa mesma sala, os organizadores conseguiram manter a elevada qualidade dos panelistas e grande interesse do público. Sobre os panelistas, cumprimento o moderador, Sr. Jonathan Whitley, correspondente de mercados emergentes do jornal Financial Times, a senhora Fabiana Vila Alves, pesquisadora da Embrapa, o senhor Daniel Nepstadt, diretor executivo da Earth Innovation Institute, o senhor Márcio Napo, diretor de sustentabilidade da JBS, o senhor Jack Watts, gerente da Agri-Food Delivery, The National Farmers Union, e aproveito também para cumprimentar todo o público que nos assiste. O tema escolhido para este painel é muito oportuno, pois nos ajuda a promover os caminhos para impulsionar uma agropecuária cada vez mais sustentável. A sinergia entre a natureza, as técnicas produtivas e o homem do campo é justamente o que faz do Brasil uma potência agroambiental. Estamos convictos que nossa experiência poderá contribuir enormemente para os anseios globais de um desenvolvimento efetivamente sustentável. Devo mencionar que reconhecemos sim que o desmatamento e as queimadas são graves problemas que necessitam de ação enérgica do governo e estamos tomando no Brasil as medidas necessárias para solucionar essa situação. Um primeiro e necessário passo para atacar o problema é melhor entender a real dimensão dessas adversidades. Dados demonstram que em 2019, 99% das propriedades rurais no Brasil produziram sem qualquer tipo de desmatamento. Além disso, a agricultura brasileira ocupa 9% e a pecuária 21% do nosso território, enquanto 66% da sua área permanece coberta por vegetação nativa. No caso específico do bioma amazônico, a vegetação nativa recobre 84% de sua área total. A agricultura e a pecuária não podem, assim, ser injustamente taxadas como vilãs da preservação. São, na verdade, aliadas valiosas nesse esforço, como detalharei a seguir. O que explica o enorme crescimento da agricultura brasileira há décadas é a melhoria da produtividade. Nos últimos 30 anos, investimentos em pesquisa possibilitaram aumentar nossa produção em 423%, com um incremento de área de apenas 43%. Temos hoje condições de triplicar nossa atual produção, recorrendo apenas àquelas áreas já ocupadas pela agropecuária. Aliado aos avanços tecnológicos, o Brasil desenvolveu um arcabouço legal robusto, como o Código Florestal. Esta legislação, aprovada em 2012, prevê que as propriedades rurais devem destinar de 20% até 80% de sua área para a preservação da vegetação nativa, sem qualquer recompensa financeira ao produtor. Com o Código Florestal, estima-se que 1/4 de toda a vegetação nativa do país encontra-se preservada dentro das propriedades privadas. Entendemos assim que as propriedades rurais constituem elo importante para a preservação ambiental. Produzir preservando define, portanto, a vocação do Brasil. Essa vocação reflete-se no firme compromisso que mantemos com o atingimento das metas expressas no Acordo de Paris sobre mudança do clima. Como é sabido, o Brasil possui uma das matrizes energéticas mais limpas do mundo. Além disso, especificamente quanto à produção agropecuária, seguiremos adotando tecnologias agrícolas sustentáveis que garantirão a intensificação de áreas degradadas e maior integração produtiva. No âmbito da Política Nacional de Mudança do Clima, que já completa 10 anos, merece destaque o Plano Agricultura de Baixo Carbono. Esse programa, conhecido como Plano ABC, tem por finalidade o planejamento de ações para a adoção de tecnologias de produção sustentáveis. O plano responde à necessidade de investimento em práticas que tragam adaptação às mudanças climáticas e que contribuam para a redução de emissão de gases de efeito estufa no setor agropecuário. Estudo recente demonstra que entre 2010 e 2018 foram recuperados, no âmbito do Plano ABC, 26,8 milhões de hectares de pastagens degradadas. Além disso, verificou-se expressivo aumento na qualidade das pastagens nas regiões centro-oeste e sul do país. A recuperação ocorreu principalmente no bioma cerrado, onde houve maior investimento do Plano ABC. A melhoria no manejo das pastagens e a disseminação das boas práticas agropecuárias é a base para a recém-lançada Carne Carbono Neutro, tema que será tratado em profundidade neste evento pela pesquisadora da Embrapa, doutora Fabiana Alves. Demonstramos na prática que o modelo tecnológico brasileiro viabiliza sistemas produtivos com baixas emissões ou mesmo neutro em carbono. A contribuição do setor agropecuário para o desenvolvimento brasileiro tem se dado, portanto, com inovação e respeito à natureza. Promovemos ainda as outras dimensões indissociáveis da sustentabilidade, a econômica e a social. Os modelos sustentáveis precisam ser viáveis economicamente e gerar renda para quem vive da atividade. além de ser imperativo que cuidemos de quem trabalha no campo. A geração de renda constitui a base dos esforços de conservação ambiental. O Brasil tem, portanto, plenas condições de atender a uma demanda crescente por alimentos, sem descuidar das nossas florestas, da nossa biodiversidade, da renda do nosso produtor, das nossas metas de diminuição das emissões de gases de efeito estufa. O Brasil tem plena consciência de que nossos esforços nacionais contribuirão com grande impacto positivo para a sustentabilidade global. Desejo a todos um proveitoso debate. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Minister. I hope everybody can hear me. Welcome all of you. Bom dia a todos no Brasil, and welcome to everybody here in London to the second of the Embassy's AgriSustainability talks. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to my friends at the Embassy for inviting me to be here. We have a really excellent panel for you this afternoon, exploring all kinds of facets of sustainable agriculture and livestock management. It's a great pleasure to have some very good speakers. I urge you to read their biographies. I'm not going to read them out for you online, but we have, just to tell you who's with us, Daniel Nepstad, who it's been my pleasure to have worked with in Brazil many years ago. Dan's been one of the leading world experts on sustainable management of the Amazon for the past 30 years, and over the past decade he's gone beyond Brazil into Peru, Colombia, and Indonesia. He was a founder of IPAM, the Amazon Environment Research Institute in Brazil, and also of Aliança da Terra, which is how I met him through the excellent Texan rancher John Carter, who's co-founder of that. And he is a long-time expert on all matters to do with reduced emissions from agriculture and deforestation. Also with us is Marcio Napo, who's the head of sustainability at JBS, the Brazilian protein group. He is focused on development and management of corporate sustainability strategies, sustainable supply chains, and certification schemes for agro-commodities. We're also joined by Jack Watts, who is Agri-Food Delivery Manager at the National Farmers Union here in the UK, been there for 3 years, following a 12-year stint at Homegrown Cereals, and a farmer born and bred, brought up in on his farm in Exmoor down in the West Country, which I know well, where his father has a suckler beef herd in an extensive low-cost system. And last but by no means least, Villa Alves, who is a researcher at Embrapa, the very excellent Brazilian Agriculture Research Corporation, where she's working at the National Beef Cattle Research Center in sustainable animal production systems. So first of all, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to talk to us for 10 minutes or so about their subjects. We urge you to join in the discussion. You can see on your screen, if you hover around the bottom, I'm sure you've already done this, there is a globe symbol which you can use to choose which language you want to hear us speaking in. E para aqueles que não entenderam ainda o que estou falando, vocês podem ouvir tudo em português. Tem globinho lá embaixo na tela. Clica aí para ouvir o áudio sem tradução ou com tradução para português ou para inglês, se quiser. And I urge everybody to ask us questions throughout. We'll be coming to a question answer session towards the end, and if you click on the Q&A box, you'll be able to put your questions in. Do please tell us who you are and who you work for, and we look forward to taking some of those questions towards the end. So let's get right on. Dan, it's a great pleasure to see you after, I think it's 12 years since we worked together on the lower fringes of the Amazon, when I was writing about sustainability issues of cattle ranching on the fringes of the Amazon for the Financial Times. And great pleasure to see you again. And Dan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and what a pleasure seeing you again. And thank you so much to the Embassy of Brazil for this wonderful invitation and panel. I've got just a few slides I'd like to share. And so I guess that's up to me here. I will try to do this with exquisite technological dexterity and Can you all see that? So I've called my comments "To Solve Amazon Deforestation, Listen to the Farmers." And that probably sounds a bit provocative for many people. And I want it to be. I think that the farmers have a very powerful proposal for reconciling agricultural production, increasing agricultural production, and forest conservation that was captured brilliantly by Minister Teresa Cristina, and who's been saying pretty much the same proposal for many years. First of all, just a quick overview of deforestation since 1996. And it's important to begin with the recognition that Brazil, the Brazilian government, with more than a dozen ministries and the central bank, orchestrated a policy and program called the PPCD, beginning in 2004, the Program for the Prevention and Control of Deforestation in the Amazon, that through a number of command and control measures, including expanding the protected area system to more than 50% of the forests that are remaining in the Brazilian Amazon, to cracking down on illegal activities, to cutting off farmers from agricultural credit in high deforestation counties or municipios, deforestation dropped from its historical average, 96 to 2005, by 77%, hitting the lowest value in 2012. Since that time, it has been gradually creeping back up. And yesterday we heard that the new numbers for August 2019 through July 2020 are at about 11,000 square kilometers. So still below that 20,000 square kilometers deforestation per year average, but the trend is creeping back up. And one core idea I want to share with you is that we have not addressed one of the core issues of forest conservation. Really good policies are very good at describing what you can't do, but also rewarding those who are in compliance with that policy, and especially those who go beyond that policy. And in this case, we do not have that situation. I would call this one of the great global market failures. If we just look at the value of land in the Amazon, on the far left, and this is an average value, this changes a lot, but the basic pattern stays the same across the Amazon. Forest land, one of the averages, using these average values, let's say forest land is $400 US per hectare. When you clear it, the value goes up at least threefold, if you're in a region where it's suitable for agricultural production. So that $400 becomes $1,400 when it is cleared. Now that same clearing event releases about 500 tons of CO2 to the atmosphere. And if we use the US EPA's estimate of the social cost of carbon of $100 per CO2 in damages to the global economy, then that clearing event cost the global economy $55,000. And what farmers are asking for is not $55,000. They're asking for a little bit of help so that if they have forests in excess of what is required by the law, they're not going to lose money. Their farms are not going to be worth less. And so this is 2020, and we still have this basic situation. We've not figured out, the global we, how to get incentives to farmers who are conserving forests. And as the minister mentioned, there's a huge area of Brazil's native vegetation on private farms. So this is a very big challenge. Now, the farmer's proposal in a nutshell And it was, stated, embedded in Minister Teresa Cristina's comments now is, let's rally around the idea of zero illegal deforestation. And according to the Forest Code, that means that in the Amazon, you must keep 80% of your farm under native forest cover. Outside of the Amazon, 20%. Article 41 of the Forest Code provides the legal framework for compensating farmers who want to go beyond compliance, but also compensating those who are in compliance. And farmers have also drawn attention to the need to really resolve the land titling chaos. There's nearly 20% of the forests of the Amazon are in undesignated territories. They're not classified as a biological reserve or as an indigenous territory or as a private farm. They're up for grabs, and that is the best context for land grabbing and land speculation. But also there's a big focus on poverty in the farmer's proposal. And, I think that this is really a huge opportunity. If we add up the farmer's proposal for the Amazon, for example, that gets us to the target that is often cited as sort of the rallying point for tropical forests, zero deforestation. And that's because so much of the Amazon is already in protected areas. It would be covered by the Forest Code, or could be addressed through a land titling scheme in the terras devolutas, the undesignated lands. I would suggest that this is a time to come together around this proposal. And what's fascinating is to get to that incentive, that missing incentive to forest conserving farmers, the mechanisms are finally coming into focus. Finally, there's a fairly large group of investors who are looking to buy forest carbon offsets. That could be $1 billion or more in the next couple of years. Brazil has established the forest carbon regime with a carbon registry. There's a few pieces that still need to be done. Many of the states, such as Mato Grosso, have very robust REDD laws, reductions in emissions from deforestation and degradation. They are ready to start selling offsets. There is international standards such as the California Tropical Forest Standard, such as Art Trees, that are ready to verify which state programs are robust and can start selling emissions reductions or offsets. But carbon neutral beef and carbon neutral soy is another way to generate those missing incentives for farmers. Embrapa has been leading the way, as we'll hear from Fabiana on this. And what strikes me as just a fascinating opportunity is really a jurisdictional approach to carbon neutral commodities, where we're measuring the carbon footprint, reducing what we can on farm and along the supply chain, and compensating the rest with some of those emissions reductions achieved by slowing deforestation. Brazil so far has generated more than 7 billion tons of emissions reductions through its success in slowing deforestation in the Amazon and in the Cerrado. And only 4% of those emissions reductions have been compensated thus far. So Brazil has a very large pool of emissions reductions that could be used to provide carbon neutral commodities. Some of those are more recent emissions reductions, especially, of course. So I think let's look at the farmer's proposal. It's powerful, and I think it's what we should rally around. Thank you.
Dan, thank you very much indeed. Some provocative and interesting points raised there, and I hope we can come back to some of that a little bit later on in Q&A. And I would urge people to send in your questions just as soon as you like. Over now to Márcio Napo at JBS JBS. As I said, he's Director of Corporate Sustainability at JBS in Brazil, and former experience at Archer Daniels Midland and Unica, the Brazilian sugarcane industry, and Abiorvi, the Brazilian vegetable oils industry association. So a whole load of experience across various parts of agribusiness in Brazil, to give us some of the Brazilian perspective on that. Marcio, over to you. Thanks very much.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you. I would like to thank the Brazilian Embassy for the invitation and also to promote this panel. Can you hear me, Jonathan? I had a problem here.
Yes, we can hear you. That's all
okay.
Going up fine.
Okay, so let's go ahead. We face the challenge of feeding 10 billion people in the world in 2050 with high quality and sustainably produced food, with animal protein consumption expected to increase by 7%. The only way to meet this challenge is to embrace more efficient production and to take advantage of the technology and innovation to produce more with less. And this requires a strong collaboration across the entire value chain. We believe it's also important to restore natural resources all over the world, such as global reforestation, and adopt regenerative agriculture practices to balance natural ecosystem. On this regarding, one of the key questions for discussion today is, can we have a sustainable livestock with animal protein production at scale? We believe the answer is yes. I think the Brazilian livestock has a huge potential to produce high quality beef in a sustainable way. Cattle breeding in Brazil is unique in the world for many reasons. Brazil, first of all, Brazil has the world's largest commercial herd. Also, our livestock production system is predominantly grass-fed, which guarantees tasty beef, better animal welfare conditions, and is also a big opportunity for grass photosynthesis to sequester a significant amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the soil as an organic matter. Well-managed pasture can offset the majority of emissions from the cattle production system. The Brazilian Forest Code is also an important point. This is our land use legislation that mandates that landowners in the Brazilian rainforest Amazon region must permanently maintain 80% of the land as forest in order to preserve the native vegetation and the biodiversity. That means that livestock producer can use only 20% of the farm area for production. In this scenario, the whole of JBS and other companies is about supporting livestock producer to increase productivity. There is producing more beef in the same production area, as well as avoiding deforesting new areas. Regarding that, since 2009, JBS has enforced strict responsible procurement policy for the purchase of cattle. Currently, we are successfully monitor 100% of our direct cattle suppliers with a system that is considered one of the best and most sophisticated in the world. The most recent third-party independent audit released this year showed that 100% of the JBS direct cattle purchases from farms located in the Amazon region met the company's social environment criteria, and they are totally in line with our responsible procurement policy. Our monitoring system, just to have an idea, assesses more than 60,000 potential livestock supply farms each day, covering more than 450,000 square kilometers or 111 million American acres, an area larger than Germany. However, there is no mandatory traceability or tagging of cattle from birth in Brazil. This presents us with a traceability challenge, as the information that allows tracking of all supply chain movement is unavailable. While all of our direct suppliers are complying with our policies, we do not have access to the supplier's data to cover all the links in the chain. Because of this, we recently launched the JBS Green Platform that will guarantee the environmental compliance of our entire cattle supply chain by 2025. This new platform will allow due diligence monitoring to be extended to other indirect links in our cattle supply chain in Brazil. It will cover the suppliers we don't have a direct relationship with, but who deal with our direct suppliers. In practice, the JBS Green Platform is a 5-year plan to allow an organized transition into a more sustainable supply chain over time, based on a blockchain technology and also an inclusive approach for no-compliant suppliers. The blockchain technology provides confidentiality and security of the data when the system assesses suppliers' information. For example, the blockchain system only collects information needed to identify the indirect supplier's farm to carry out our social and environmental analysis, rather than any confidential data or commercial data inside the official documentation for cattle movements in Brazil. This is an incentive for suppliers to join the platform, as we can guarantee, as I said, total security of the data. But back into the inclusive approach for the no-compliant supplier, as I consider the heart, the most important point of our strategy, the Green Platform will empower the company direct suppliers and allow them to have access to the result of their own suppliers' environmental analysis. This can help our direct suppliers to select their own suppliers in line with the JBS policies. This goes beyond encourage our suppliers to comply with our sustainability criteria. We will actively be undertaking collaborative work with all no-compliant indirect suppliers. For this, we will be providing legal, environmental, and agricultural advice to producers who join the JBS platform and need to address their own processing plants in the Amazon. Will have, from the beginning of next year, a dedicated technical team to help the direct suppliers to correct any problem in their own supply chain. Providing support to the indirect suppliers, most of them are smallholder calf producers, is crucial to make a permanent positive change in the cattle producer chain and to stop deforestation in the Amazon and also in other Brazilian biomes. Another important part of our strategy is helping indirect suppliers to increase productivity, to produce more while using less land. This way, it does not need to be a choice between agriculture and preserving biodiversity. For JBS as a company, sustainability is a driving force across all of our business operation. As the largest meat processing company in the world, we are working to constantly minimize social environmental impact from our operation. Last year, we invested almost $4 million on global sustainability-related initiatives. A major focus of this was investing in processes that encourage the sustainable production of raw material, especially in our supply chain, in order to minimize the climate change risk and also reach ambitious carbon emissions targets. To summarize, we are committed to making the necessary change in our wider beef value chain in Brazil to make it more sustainable and transparent in order to reach our goal of deforestation-free supply chain by 2025. We understand that the beef and livestock industry in Brazil has an important role to play in helping to tackle the climate crisis and achieving a carbon neutral future, as well as providing food security and tropical forest conservation. Livestock can deliver biodiversity, social and economic development, sustainable livelihood, and also food security goals. We are committed to being among the driver of this. Thank you very much.
Marcia, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating stuff, and plenty to come back on there as well, I think. Coming up next, we have Jack Watts at the National Farmers Union. Jack, as I said, is started at the NFU, I'm sorry, as Chief Combinable Crops Advisor. And he now works across NFU sectors on projects that cut across both policy and collective industry focus. And one of his main areas is identifying what's needed at the government, policy and collective industry levels to achieve legitimate advancement in efficiency of farming. So Jack, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Could everyone see me and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone in London. Good morning, everyone in Brazil. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today. I suppose if I was to summarise what I'm about to say over the next few minutes into one sentence, it would be about empowering the consumer and rewarding the farmer in a modern food system that now has to really take into account sustainability and what that in fact means. But let me first start by just giving a bit of context as to where we are in the UK. So the UK has now left the European Union, and by the end of this year we've come to the end of a transition period, but we don't actually know what the end of that transition period brings with it. Earlier this week the government announced its agricultural transition period, the future of UK agriculture outside of the European Common Agricultural Policy. And that's been quite unnerving. The uncertainty has been massively unnerving. What does that mean? But there's been a huge amount of talk about sustainability, about rewarding farmers for delivering sustainability, biodiversity, sinking carbon. And so this is a very hot topic of where we go. And this all happens at a time of huge focus on climate change, and then more recently a global pandemic, and all the stresses that's put on not just the UK society, but the global society as well. I think we have to understand a little bit about history as well. Certainly from a European point of view, the last 60, 70 years, from an agricultural point of view, is quick, produce as much as possible, as cheap as possible, because we need to feed people. And that era is has gradually changed over the decades, where it's not so much about how much we produce, it's about how we produce it. So it's not about production, it's about productivity. It's how efficiently do we use natural resources to produce a kilo of beef, a ton of wheat, and that is a key part of things as well. Part of our bigger challenges, I think, is from a global point of view, and this is where I think the global meat industry, livestock industries have a joint ambition, or a joint challenge here, is around the perceived image of livestock sectors in the minds of a westernized consumer. There's an awful lot of investment in what modern diets may well look like. What is a sustainable diet? And before we really can entertain that, we have to understand, well, what does sustainability mean? We know that climate change is a big part of that, but what about water, biodiversity, and indeed sustainability of rural economies and the ability of farmers to be able to keep farming? But I do believe that there is a global effort needed amongst livestock industries to talk about what's good and what is very much possible. When I talk about empowering the consumer, it's about giving the consumer, and industries working hard to give consumers everything they need to make informed choices about the food they want to consume. It's quite challenging in the issue of climate change, because climate change and carbon and methane are very complex subjects to communicate. But I think much has to be done around that, particularly around methane and around longevity as a greenhouse gas, and what does that mean, and the role of productivity in improving essentially production per unit of emissions. So that's all important stuff. But I think the key area to think about is about actually what's the role of the farmer here, and how is the farmer rewarded for both capturing and sinking carbon, but also putting some stewardship, long-term stewardship around carbon. And I think the ambition, as I see it, is, well, how do we reward the farmer for doing this? How is the farmer rewarded? Because if the farmer is rewarded for capturing, for sinking, for stewarding carbon, that's an incredible global good, not just for farmers, but for society as well. And that's been part of the challenge. We've gone for this race for food production over recent decades, where price and cost has been a really incredible driver, but hasn't actually necessarily reflected the true cost of food. Part of the challenges we see in the global space is around assurance, and it's always reassuring that we're making progress in this space, and the global trade assurance and staying WTO compliant with such things has meant we can only really make progress in the space of product safety in terms of food safety. And it's relatively difficult to make that progress in terms of environmental sustainability and be able to make sure that we have integral global standards to ensure that a country like the UK, that is going through some very significant changes in its production, doesn't end up exporting around the world. And that's an incredibly challenging area facing the industry. So to reflect, I think we must be ambitious in that. Is livestock production a menace to climate? No, I firmly believe that actually sustainable livestock systems are really part of the solution. If I look at a lot of our farming systems in the UK, some of the most sustainable ones are those that integrate both arable crop production with livestock production, and actually driving down reliance on manufactured fertilizers, cycling of nutrients, and really bolstering the natural ability of the ecosystem to produce food. I think one of the dangers we face globally, and indeed in westernized economy, is this real demonization of whole food groups. Beef is bad, vegetables are good. And that's an incredibly broad brush and a very dangerous thing. It actually risks actually making things even more unsustainable, and very much we need to be championing things as part of the solution, and very much around production systems as well. So to sum up, I think it really is about empowering the consumer. What does sustainability mean? How do we measure it? How do we present it to the consumer? But reward the farmer as well, not just for producing the food that they produce, but delivering the services, whether that's in sinking carbon, whether that's in driving biodiversity. Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much indeed. Again, fascinating stuff, and a few questions to come back on you about that later on. And I'm glad to see that questions are coming in from the audience, so we can carry on with that a little bit later on. And now, last but as I say, by no means least, we have Fabiana Villa-Alves at Embrapa, which when I was working in Brazil was a tremendous, excuse me, I didn't start my video, here I am, so sorry, was a tremendous source of fantastic information, not only lots of data and insights, but some very good analysts and great people to talk to. So Fabiana, delighted to have you with us. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning for everybody. I will talk in Portuguese. Gostaria de agradecer à Embaixada Brasileira pelo convite para falar sobre esse projeto que começou na Embrapa e que hoje é uma plataforma nacional para a valorização de carne produzida de modo sustentável. Como a ministra já comentou, que nós temos no Brasil esse grande plano, né, esse grande programa, né, o Plano ABC, que começou em 2010 e está finalizando a sua primeira etapa neste ano, em 2020, e onde nós, dentro com esse pano de fundo do Brasil, tentando realmente trazer tecnologias onde nós pudéssemos mensurar o quanto de emissões foram evitadas, e para isso se criou todo um sistema de governança do governo brasileiro, com auxílio da Embrapa, onde várias pesquisas foram realizadas, porque alguns dos números que são divulgados, já foi dito pelos meus colegas anteriormente, alguns desses números, eles são muito ligados e muito dizem respeito a sistemas que não são os nossos, né? Que não são aqueles brasileiros. Então, nós tivemos um grande projeto brasileiro chamado PECOS, onde as emissões dos sistemas produtivos, dos vários sistemas que nós temos, apesar da nossa grande produção de carne ser a pasto, então, por volta de 90% da nossa carne é grass-fed beef, com todas as consequências, né, os benefícios, e também com algumas dificuldades. Então, nesse cenário, e a partir de pesquisas realizadas há mais de 40 anos pela Embrapa, em todas as suas unidades, a Embrapa é uma instituição nacional, nós temos em todos os estados unidades de pesquisa pública de alta qualidade, e é onde nós conseguimos cristalizar em uma marca comercial voltada para que o consumidor pudesse entender realmente todos aqueles benefícios que alguns sistemas de produção altamente sustentáveis, o que hoje nós chamamos no Brasil de intensificação sustentável, e é onde esses sistemas com base em sistemas de integração, tipo lavoura, pecuária, floresta, e onde nós tínhamos, ok? E é onde nós tínhamos todos os benefícios em relação não somente ao carbono, como também já foi comentado, mas quando nós falamos em carbono, nós estamos também falando em biodiversidade, nós estamos falando em água, nós estamos falando em sistemas mais eficientes do ponto de vista produtivo, de intensificação da produção. Então, um número que eu trago aqui para exemplificar, onde nós conseguimos, por exemplo, produzir 3, 4, 5 vezes mais animais em uma mesma área do que em sistemas convencionais. Então, tudo isso eram benefícios que a ciência já tinha conhecimento, mas que nós não conseguíamos criar valor. E a partir da carne carbono neutro e da marca conceito carne carbono neutro, nós conseguimos fazer com que os produtores, por um sistema de certificação de terceira parte, do tipo MRV, nós conseguimos criar valor e fazer com que esses produtores fossem valorizados por produzir de forma mais sustentável. Então, o Brasil ele possui diferentes sistemas, diferentes iniciativas, né, em todo o Brasil, no Cerrado, na Amazônia, na Mata Atlântica, em todos os nossos biomas de produção sustentáveis de carne. E a carne carbono neutro, ela veio justamente para quantificar esse comprometimento com o Beyond Compliance. Então, aonde esses produtores poderiam ser valorizados e aonde, por meio justamente dessa certificação, uma certificação privada, de terceira parte, mas com protocolos públicos. Com o diferencial das demais de outras iniciativas, onde essa certificação ela era science-based, então onde nós tínhamos não somente uma opinião sobre o que era sustentabilidade ou abrangendo alguns itens de sustentabilidade, mas onde nós tínhamos um protocolo, diretrizes públicas que focavam em dados científicos obtidos pela Embrapa. A partir dessa primeira iniciativa, carne carbono neutro, surgiram, e nós estamos trabalhando numa plataforma de pecuária baixo carbono certificada, e onde nós temos outras marcas conceito, como a carne baixo carbono, relacionada à carne produzida em pastagens bem manejadas, onde nós temos a carne carbono nativo em pastagens onde nós temos remanescentes da vegetação nativa e outros produtos, como couro carbono neutro, o bezerro carbono neutro, e expandindo para outras commodities, como, por exemplo, a soja baixo carbono. Então, nós procuramos, a partir de uma marca comercial voltada ao consumidor, para que ele pudesse entender que quando nós falamos em consumidores, não é só o consumidor do varejo, mas também os países, né? Então, países que compram do Brasil percebessem esse compromisso do Brasil em práticas mais sustentáveis, principalmente ligadas à produção pecuária.
Muito obrigado, Fabiana. Muito bom. Várias perguntas entrando sobre a sua fala já. Bom, obrigado a todos. Muita matéria para conversar, muito assunto de muito interesse. Eu vou premiar as pessoas que entraram primeiro com as perguntas, e indo primeiro para Sophia Watkins, who has sent in a question for Dan. She asks the following: offsets born from prevented reductions in forest carbon stock are up against temporal challenges, never mind climate projections for carbon stocks that showing forests are likely to become net emitters. You may be paid for stock today, but the land remains useless to farmers in perpetuity, and thus returns to being exposed to invasion pressures, etc. What's your preferred, your favorite long-term plan for maintaining incentives for standing forests?
Yes, thanks for that. I think in the short term, the solution is really incentives coming in through the emerging forest carbon offset market. Right now, it's all voluntary. Pretty soon, it will be regulated. Right here in California, there's a possibility of a regulated market for that, and in other places. But I think there are other ways too for compensating farmers for their legal reserves, forest reserves. One could be, for example, putting a small fee on hydropower generation. Right now, hydropower generation in the Amazon is very dependent upon forests. Forests are feeding the rain clouds, which run the turbines, and yet there's no financial connection between the two today. There's also some research on the benefits on farm of having a legal reserve. If your soy crop, if it's a very severely hot or dry year, the soy that's closer to the forest within a few hundred meters suffers the impacts of those climate or weather extremes less than if your farm has less forests. And we need to understand those relationships better. And I think it's going to be a blend of things, and including the incentives for low carbon commodities that Fabiana was describing as well.
Okay, thanks very much. And for Fabiana and for Márcio, another question, this one, I'll read it in Portuguese since it's here. Atualmente existem muitas ameaças a pastos, tipo doenças, falta de água, o que incentiva o uso de suplemento alimentar na seca. Quais são as previsões ou focos para combater problemas com o pasto, tipo trocando espécie ou manejo da pasta, e a diminuição de recursos hídricos, e qual dos suplementos alimentares disponível na região é considerado o mais sustentável? Talvez a gente vá para a Fabiana primeiro.
Ok, quando nós falamos em ameaças a pasto e sustentabilidade, quando a gente fala em manejo sustentável, nós estamos falando de uma série de manejos, né, uma série de práticas que são adequadas para cada propriedade, para cada situação, para cada bioma. Então, não existe qual suplemento alimentar mais sustentável, né? Ele precisa estar dentro dessa ótica de sustentabilidade que, como o Jack comentou, não é só sustentabilidade ambiental, né? Nós temos a sustentabilidade econômica e a sustentabilidade social também. Então, quando a gente fala, por exemplo, em manejo sustentável, né, em produção sustentável, nós estamos, por exemplo, falando em seguir calendários sanitários que já são estabelecidos pelo governo por lei. A questão nós temos a lei das águas no Brasil, então alguns estados já têm outorga de água, então essa questão do uso da água, da proibição dos animais, por exemplo, beberem água diretamente dos recursos naturais, né, das fontes naturais de água. Então, tudo isso, ele vem dentro do que nós chamamos de manejo sustentável. O Brasil possui várias tecnologias, várias pesquisas, né, vários atores aí, tanto na extensão privada quanto de pesquisas. Então, tudo isso a gente inclui dentro de boas práticas agropecuárias que são difusas aqui nos diferentes sistemas e diferentes biomas brasileiros.
Okay, muito bom. Márcio, can I ask you the same question?
Sure. I don't know if I go in Portuguese or in English, but I'll try in English. As you know, I'm not a livestock production expert like Fabiana from Embrapa. We are from the industry side. But I'll just add to the Fabiana's comment. I believe one of the important points you have to take into consideration when you are talking about the whole Brazilian agribusiness at this moment, it's about the crop livestock integration. Is a new important movement to come from the last 10 years and getting a momentum here in Brazil, when most of the producers are bringing together grain production, especially soybean and corn production, and also cattle raising production, livestock. Usually here in Brazil, we are seeing the following movement happening. From the soybean growers or the grain producer side, usually they produce soybean and then they go using the no-till process to produce corn, especially in the states like Mato Grosso as a second harvest. And then the remaining of the year became a trend between soy growers to use pasture to cover the land for around 6 months, and then they invite some cattle ranchers in the region to bring the cattle into the soy grower farm with a pasture with high productivity. On the other side, we are seeing especially medium and large size ranchers. They are using more and more soybean production as a strategy to recover degraded pasture. When you bring the soybean into a rancher farm, you have to fertilize the soil. You have to improve the quality of the soil for 1 or 2 soybean harvest, and then they come back to pasture. At the end of the day, when we are using the same production system, soybean, corn, and also pasture, we have a strong agronomic synergy, because usually the grain production, they improve the chemical quality of the soil. At the same time, the pasture that has long roots, as a grass, they improve the physical quality of the soil, and so harvest by harvest, you are improving the productivity of grain production and also the livestock. That's quite important. Probably in 10 years' time, I would say, we are not saying about ranchers and growers and grain growers here in Brazil. Probably we have a mix when these two kind of producers will become one single Brazilian producer with around 3 harvests a year and the same property. When you have this kind of new dynamic in the Brazilian agribusiness field, Probably we have a new strategy in order to face some dry season, as you said. Probably we have more grain. We have a better availability of grain on the local basis for the ranchers, and so they have more food for the dry season. And probably, as we can see from JBS standpoint, the feedlot, especially same feedlot process, is also increasing here in Brazil, and is part of the explanation how the Brazilian livestock is increasing year by year the productivity. That's my point of view about that.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks very much. Sorry, forgive me 1 second. Yes, here I am back again. I have a couple of questions that come in on the same topic for Jack and for Dan as well. Jack, maybe come to you first on this. You both of you, well, not only you mentioned the importance of rewarding the farmer, but how do we do that when it comes down to it? What does that mean? Does that mean, the questions from Carolina van der Velde and from Ricardo Khalil, who's the Honorary Consul of Brazil in Wales. How do we actually reward the farmers? Does it mean higher prices for consumers? Does it mean government subsidies? Is there some other source of funding through some stakeholders or supply chain? How do you actually get the rewards through?
Yeah, and this is I think one of the most challenging questions that I think agricultural policymakers have in our time. I think that the first sort of part of this is making sure society has access to comprehensively sustainable food at a price that's accessible, and so to think that all of those rewards can be built into the price of food is quite challenging given the levels of inequality in society. So there has to be another mechanism, and indeed the market just isn't geared to reward all of those sort of non-physical goods that the farmer's producing. And there's almost, I think, a lot of academic work to say, well, what the carbon in the soil or in the trees and the potential of that farmer to capture and steward more carbon, what's that actually worth to society as a whole? And I really like Daniel's first slide because he demonstrated it really well in those metrics. And so if the market isn't delivering that, what kind of mechanism is in place to reward? What the term public good gets used quite a lot in the UK in terms of future agricultural policy. And so how is that public good rewarded to the farmer on the ground doing the activity and stewarding that carbon? I think it's a little bit of an ideology thing that the market can solve it, because we know food markets are quite short term and are very competitive from a price perspective, and don't necessarily have that long term focus towards the carbon sinking. Indeed, that we've still some way to go before carbon really has a commercial value, and it's something that farmers can extract value from. I look forward to the day we do, but there is definitely a role for policy to be able to actually to say to the farmer, right, you've got X thousand acres, you're stewarding X thousand tons of carbon, and we'll also reward you for capturing X more thousand tons of carbon, and we'll give you long-term reward for stewarding that carbon as well. Getting those right signals at the right place would go a huge way to really mitigating a lot of the impacts that we're seeing today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. And of course, I mean, the question that obviously arises on the back of that is that, if one part of the world were to do that, how are those producers not undercut by producers in other parts of the world that are not doing that? And in an increasingly or decreasingly multilateral world at the moment, maybe that's something we need to worry about. Dan, I mean, is there anything on the horizon that suggests that this kind of thing will be possible, that we can manage to get the full cost reflected in the product?
We have 27 years of international voluntary standards for sustainability based on the premise that the market will pay for sustainable supplies. And there are price premiums, but they're small. They're very tiny for soybeans, for timber and pulp, for palm oil. They don't really pay the costs. And I do think there's a big role for government. I think we have in the road to COP26, hosted by the UK, of course, we have a huge opportunity to fix this problem. The UK has already signaled in its imported deforestation policy that it will recognize legal compliance and not demand zero. I think that's a very good step. Part of that too, though, is for there to be an international regime that has really efficiently delivered incentives to forest conserving farmers. And right now, farmers are feeling vilified, demonized. They're bewildered as to why their role in both conserving forests and producing food is not recognized and praised. I think those mechanisms for delivering those payments will come down to implementing the CAR, the Forest Code Environmental Rural Registry, which farmers have done their part. There's, I believe, now 6 million CAR applications in the queue. Mato Grosso, where I do a lot of work, there's 95,000 applications being processed at the rate of 4 per day. And that is an opportunity for speeding up through technology, through automation, through online systems, the processing of those registries. That is the basic mechanism in Brazil for saying that farmer deserves payments and this is what those payments should be. So I think we're at a wonderful inflection point on this. A lot could happen in the next 11 months, 12 months in the road to COP26.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, indeed, we are at an inflection point and a lot of change underway. Maybe we can think about it pushing both ways. We have obviously unresolved issues of Brexit and what kind of trade deals are going to be done on agriculture there. But perhaps, as you say, some progress. The
Excuse me, Jonathan.
Yes, I'm being
Yeah, before moving forward to the next question, let me jump into this important question has made. It's about market prices. From the industry side, we don't see that this new revolution and the beef production will come by prices. You know, sustainability is not more about some niche market. It's became the rule of the game. It's became the mainstream. And so, from our view, we believe that this improvement in the sustainability standard of producers will come from a new engagement between industry and suppliers. You know, we're talking about carbon and also deforestation in this panel, but from the industry standpoint, this agenda to engage with suppliers is much larger. We are talking about sustainability. We are talking about animal welfare best practices. We're talking about some food safety rules. We're talking about how to improve the quality and the quantity of the raw material, you know. And so we constantly engaging with the supplier more and more in order to help them improve their standards, you know. And so it's the same philosophy behind the JBS Green Platform, as I said. In order to move ahead with full traceability in our supply chain, in order to cover the indirect suppliers, there's no other way. We have to engage with them and to not only to identify some environmental problems in our indirect supply chain, but to go beyond it and to solve these problems in partnership with the suppliers. That's why we're putting a lot of money, resources, and people in order to help suppliers to get in compliance with the Brazilian Forest Code. We believe based on this new strategy, we are deploying a totally new relationship with our suppliers. This is the base to make this transformation. And so, in summary, we don't believe in premium price as the driver to make this transformation. We believe in the different engagement with suppliers to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. I want to come back to you on aspects of that in just a moment. We've had a couple of questions on what JBS is doing. But Fabiana, posso voltar só para você rapidinho? Você também falou dessa questão de como o produtor é valorizado, além do que os outros têm falado. Como que faz na sua visão?
Então, quando a gente fala em sustentabilidade, nós estamos falando de várias coisas que não são só carbono, né? Eu acho que isso ficou bem claro. Então, tem a questão do bem-estar animal, tem a questão de conservação por causa da biodiversidade, não somente por causa de estoques de carbono, enfim. A iniciativa da plataforma Pecuária Baixo Carbono certificada, ela foca o carbono porque é o tema, é a moeda da vez, né? No Brasil, nós não temos pagamentos ainda por biodiversidade, nós não temos pagamento ainda por conservação de florestas, né? Desmatamento zero, enfim, porque esses são considerados compliance, né? Então, eles estão na legislação. Então, o Código Florestal, a questão e outras legislações, né? Então, eles são considerados compliance. O carbono, sim, no Brasil como no mundo, né? Ele talvez seja o mais evidente para se criar mecanismos, e aí sim nós estamos falando de mecanismos de remuneração ao produtor. Então, como o Márcio acabou de comentar, existem vários mecanismos, né, tanto do setor privado, então várias indústrias, né, fazendo, e vários tipos de, não só os frigoríficos, né, mas outras também, tentando trazer essa remuneração ao produtor. E no caso da carne carbono neutra, então nós focamos em sistemas específicos de produção, onde nós teríamos mecanismos. Essa foi uma das perguntas que surgiu aí no chat. Eu cliquei ali errado, mas vou acabar respondendo ao vivo. Nós temos alguns mecanismos que são voltados, por exemplo, no caso da carne carbono neutro especificamente, então há sim um pagamento a mais pela arroba produzido dentro daquele sistema, até porque essa certificação é um serviço, né? Então o produtor, ele é um serviço a mais que ele precisa ter dentro do sistema, mas não que necessariamente ele vai precisar pagar, porque os modelos de negócio também são inúmeros, né? Como outras iniciativas aí, ligando, por exemplo, PDVs diretamente com produção de carne com alguma qualidade ou com algum atributo especial. No caso do CCN, nós conseguimos, então, essa remuneração a mais pela arroba, né, do produtor, mas também esse produtor, ele, por ser um sistema MRV, né, e aí respondendo diretamente a pergunta, ele consegue comprovar que aquelas áreas seguiram, né, protocolos e são mensuráveis, são reportáveis e são passíveis de auditoria, por exemplo, e são, por isso, capazes de receber por créditos de carbono, né? Que são coisas diferentes, né? Quando a gente fala em gases de efeito estufa, nós estamos falando em redução das emissões e em fixação, né? Então, e aí os offsets, que são os mecanismos de pagamento, não existe só os créditos de carbono, outros mecanismos, enfim, acho que a gente poderia até alguém sugeriu aí se fazer algo específico, né, Jonathan? Acho que até você especificamente sobre esse assunto, mas o acesso a crédito de carbono, o acesso a finanças verdes. Então, o Brasil são dois grandes movimentos, né, que está ocorrendo aí nos últimos 5 anos, 5, 6 anos, que é um grande projeto de regulação de mercado de carbono no Brasil e o outro para as finanças verdes, né, capitaneado pelo Ministério da Agricultura, Pecuária e Abastecimento, pelo MAPA, e aonde nas finanças verdes, então, esse acesso por diferentes sistemas, diferentes iniciativas, né, que têm acesso a, por exemplo, fundos de investimento ou empréstimos com valores mais atrativos, né, ligados justamente à sustentabilidade. Então, quando a gente fala em iniciativas, eu gosto sempre de enfatizar que são várias, né? E aí cada uma ela é adequada, né? O Daniel citou lá no Mato Grosso, nós temos lá o PCI, né? Que é em âmbito estadual, né? Junto com outros atores e outras iniciativas, né? O Brasil é um continente, então não seria nem justo, né? E muito menos certo se fazer uma só iniciativa que conseguisse envolver todos os sistemas produtivos, todos os biomas, todos os níveis de tecnificação que nós temos, né? Então, foi comentado aí sobre a suplementação. Nós temos diferentes níveis de tecnificação, né? Então, suplementação a pasto, suplementação no terço final, em confinamento, sistemas semi-confinados a pasto, sistemas de confinamento. Então, essa grandeza do nosso clima, né? Do nosso país, faz com que também o país consiga ofertar diferentes tipos de carne, né? Isso também é importante se dizer, né? Então, não é porque uma carne certificada ela vai acabar com a carne commodity. Agora, nós temos sim que trazer a sustentabilidade em si, esse tema do manejo sustentável, das boas práticas agropecuárias, para todos os sistemas, né? Independente se eles são certificados, independente se eles estão visando o crédito de carbono, nós precisamos ter aquela base, né, de segurança do alimento e segurança alimentar. Eu acho que isso sim, a sustentabilidade traz muito esse pano de fundo. Okay. E aí o produtor que quiser ir um pouco além, né, a gente sempre fala esse termo beyond compliance, né, então ele vai ter sim que seguir algumas regras, né, por exemplo, o desmatamento zero, mesmo que ele tenha, né, possibilidade de desmatar conforme a região onde ele está, que seja amparado por lei. Então, isso sim vai ser valorizado. Então, uma forma de se valorizar, mas sempre tendo esse pano de fundo da sustentabilidade, que eu acho que o Plano ABC trouxe muito isso. Né? Ele trouxe a gente usa essa expressão no português, não sei se no inglês, de subir a régua. Né? Então, não se admite mais ter pastagens degradadas, animais sofrendo por causa de bem-estar, por falta de água, por doenças. Isso não é inadmissível, mesmo que seja para a carne commodity, né? Aquela carne mais barata. Afinal, nós temos mais da metade da população brasileira que tem pouco acesso ao consumo de carne, né?
Sim. Ok, perfeito. Tem comentário aqui do Pedro Nogueira, só para falar aqui do EPAM, que eles estão iniciando um projeto que remunera o produtor por excedentes de vegetação nativa em relação à Reserva Nacional Mato Grosso. Chama-se Conserve. I want to come back to you, Marcio, on a couple of questions here. One from Jessica Fonseca da Silva: will the data disclosed by the suppliers in the JBS Green platform be available for the general public? And another from Graça Yara Souza, who's a researcher at the LSE here in London, saying she'd like to hear more from Marcio about how GBS is controlling and preventing cattle laundering. And this is something that my colleagues at the FT in Brazil wrote about quite recently, about that you mentioned, incentives for or encouraging your suppliers to help their suppliers to comply, but how much of this is enforceable, and how much of it is voluntary, and so how much does that degree of enforceability impact on its effectiveness?
Very well. Two important questions. So first of all, first question about JBS strategy in order to monitor all links in our supply chain. So as I said, last September, JBS launched the JBS Green Platform. It's a 5 years plan, more than to identify some problems, especially illegal deforestation in our cattle supply chain for the indirect suppliers. Our purpose is to go beyond, as I said, is to identify problems, to engage with suppliers, and to help them to solve these problems, take the Brazilian Forest Code as a base for doing that. And so from now until 2025, we'll be engaging with the supplier on voluntary basis and invite our direct suppliers to go on board our blockchain platform in order to provide us some individual authorization to identify their all indirect suppliers, their own suppliers, in the state basis GTA databases. GTA is the official documentation from the Ministry of Agriculture to control cattle movement here in Brazil for sanitary controlling. And so, as I said, in order to bring all the suppliers, most them, to identify suppliers and to put them in a kind of blacklist. That's what happened in the last 10 years regarding to the beef industry and also the soybean industry. Everybody knows about the soybean moratorium here in Brazil. The purpose of these two approach was identify problems and to exclude producers from the company's supply chain. Unfortunately, I believe this is a partial solution to solve the deforestation problem, because despite all the efforts made by soybean industry companies like JBS, I didn't know, but we have today around almost 12,000 cattle ranchers blocked my system, my commercial system by deforestation, especially. And unfortunately, this is not enough to stop the problem. And so we have to go beyond. We have to identify illegal deforestation and then to partner with suppliers and to help them to solve this problem. Doing the following. We'll be providing legal consultants, because most of the time, especially smallholder producers, they don't have access to some environmental lawyer in order to run the process into the environmental body and the state level. You know, they need this kind of advice, legal advice for doing that. As a second step, according to the Brazilian legislation, all deforestation made after 2008, according to the Brazilian Forest Code, the great majority of that must be reforested, you know. And once again, the ranchers, they know how to raise cattle, but they don't know how to plant trees. We need to help them in order to develop some reforestation plan according to the Brazilian Forest Code. It's called PRAD, Programa de Regularização Ambiental, is the second step after the CAR to be in compliance with the Brazilian Forest Code. And so once again, we need to provide some environmental consultants advice to help producers to develop this reforestation plan. And then, as the third step, especially for the ranchers that have some illegal deforestation from a long time ago, probably the majority of this deforestation, of this deforested area, has some pasture today. And so in order to be in compliance with the law, the ranchers, they most of the time, they must reduce the total area dedicated to pasture to be in compliance with the law. Probably that's one of the most important obstacles to implement the Brazilian Forest Code. And so once again, we need to help the suppliers to improve productivity. That means to produce the same amount of cattle or more cattle in less area, you know. And so we'll be provided these three kind of consultants to attract our suppliers to our platform. At the end of the day, I used to say it's a win-win situation. You know, we need to forward in terms of traceability, and most of ranchers they need to go ahead in order to implement the Brazilian Forest Code. We'll be help them for doing that. The second question about cattle laundering. What's cattle laundering? Most of the time, when a rancher, especially some direct supplier, the guy involved with finishing the cattle, and they have some illegal deforestation in the property, or they have some environmental embargoes in the property. They have some difficulty to put the cattle on the market. They use some third-party farm to clean up the cattle, you know, to wash the cattle, to pass to the meat packers. You know, we call it that as a cattle triangulation, because it's involving more than one single farm to deliver the cattle to the meat packer. At the end of the day, despite this is a problem for us, our view about that, it's a positive sign from the market. You know, I believe 3-4 years ago, most of ranchers with illegal deforestation, they don't need to make this kind of cattle triangulation, because once JBS blocked this no compliance supplier, they just get some other meat packer on the local basis to offer the raw material with no problem, you know. But part of the JBS strategy in the last 3 years was to collaborate with the federal prosecutors here in Brazil and some NGOs such as Imaflora in order to deploy some industry-wide approach to bring my competitors to monitor their suppliers according to the Brazilian legislation. And over time, it's becoming more and more difficult for illegal ranchers to put the cattle on the market. That's why they are making this triangulation. In this perspective, there's a new program called the Boy and Track, as I said, in partnership with the prosecutors, and we proposed to the to the Beef on Track program some new strategy in order to avoid cattle laundry. It's about measure the productivity, total productivity of the farm. We have some maximal productivity number by 3 cattle head by hectare by year, and every farm that are delivering more than this maximal theoretical capacity, productivity capacity, it's an alert system in JBS. And we know this producer probably, they are involved with cattle laundry, and then we just block the suppliers. There's another system we are developing in order to create a kind of buffer zone for each of our cattle suppliers, and dedicating in the case we have some illegal deforestation or embargoed area surrounding the farm. Once again, is alert system that pay our attention in order to engage with the supplier and to discover if they have some problem, if they are using this kind of cattle laundry strategy to pass some illegal cattle to our operation.
Okay, understood. That's a very complete answer. Thanks very much. We are actually out of time, but I haven't been told to wrap up, so I'm not going to. I just want to ask 2 very quick last questions, one to Jack and one to Dan. Jack, you said, I'm hoping to get some very useful information from you. You said that, you know, this attitude that vegetarian food good, meat bad is actually counterproductive, and threatens sustainability. My 16-year-old daughter stopped eating meat a couple of years ago. So what can I tell her when she's refusing to eat half the meal? How is that actually threatening sustainability?
Yeah, very good question. I think it's the demonization of whole food groups is an oversimplification of what the challenge is. So it's more, I would say, it's becoming quite common. It's not the cow, but the how, I think, is probably how I would describe it.
Okay, understood. And Dan, very quickly back to you. This is, you know, we've been talking a lot about Brazil. This is not a Brazilian problem. This is a global problem. And you've been looking specifically at Indonesia and other parts of the world. In terms of the legislation and the way that it's applied, how do you think Brazil is doing in a global context?
Brazil is the world's most ambitious private land forest conservation policy, and it's a huge job to get it implemented. Brazil is also, you know, a hard place to do business. It's a very bureaucratic country. I just lived in Indonesia. I think Indonesia actually might win on that one in terms of bureaucracy. So this has to be a collective effort. Let's get the CAR implemented. Some of the technology companies here in California are talking to the government of Mato Grosso to help, for example, speed up the CAR. And as Marcio mentioned, right after that, we have to get the recuperation plans up and running, monitor that. That itself has huge carbon benefits. So I think let's look at this at a collective effort. Brazil has itself set aside more than half of the Amazon as protected areas, as indigenous reserves. It's not asking for compensation for all of that, but this private land forest piece of this puzzle deserves a global effort, global recognition, collaboration, less stone throwing, and I think huge progress can be made in a short amount of time.
Okay, hope you're right. Very good note on which to end. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Marcio, Jack, Fabiana, for some excellent contributions. Very interesting debate. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Roberto Doring, Deputy Head of the mission here at the Brazilian Embassy in London, for some closing remarks. Thank you all very much.
Muito obrigado, Jonathan, por moderar o painel de hoje para nós. Many thanks also to all speakers for sharing your valuable insights. I'm sure we have all learned a great deal in the past hour or so. In some instances, a new light has been shed on facts we knew already. In other, our conventional wisdom has been tested. It may be that we don't fully agree with everything that's being said, but I think that none of us has remained indifferent to the debate. So this is the idea behind our agri-sustainability talks. It would be futile to try and summarize the discussion. So as we conclude today's session, please allow me just to emphasize this central message. Brazil's livestock production, as its agricultural production at large, is about science and innovation. This is the main driver of our sustainability. As Agriculture Minister Tereza Cristina pointed out in her keynote address, the science-based solutions we have developed in Brazil are key to face the challenge of climate change and at the same time that of eradication of hunger. In other words, science is the way forward towards sustainable development in its environmental, social, and economic dimensions. And in this journey, of course, there's the imperative of working closely with all relevant stakeholders. Above all, there's the need to listen to farmers, as has been mentioned today, and as has been the case in Brazil. Now, challenges remain. One is clearly related to the importance of creating the right incentives for farmers to preserve large portions of their land. It's virtually a missing link, as has also been underlined today. A missing link that calls for collective action on a global level. We are delighted that these and other issues have been so comprehensively covered by the panel today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, again at 2 p.m. London time, for the second and last panel of this year's Agri-Sustainability Talks. We'll be addressing green finance for agribusiness and bioenergy. We will see that also in the realm of energy production and consumption, by far the main source of greenhouse gas emissions, science and sustainable development go hand in hand. See you then, and thank you all so much in the audience for having borne with us.